Hello everybody, I am Greg DJG from the DIY ELiquid Recipes group, and I'm making my first video about mixing. So we're going to be doing a very simple recipe today. I'm going to be showing you one method of mixing. I'm sure there will be lots of comments about how it's easier with a scale and all that kind of stuff. I've been mixing for about 2 years and I use syringes. What we're going to be making today is just a simple caramel apple recipe. Actually, we're going to make two bottles. One that's a 70-30, 70% VG and 30% PG, and then we're going to be making another one that is high VG. So, the way that I mix, I have a number of syringes. This is a 1 ml syringe. I've got a 3. I've got a 10. And I've got a 25, or 20, you can go up to 25. These are called Lure Lock, L-E-U-R, lock syringes, and what that means is that the syringe is separate from the needle, and the needle screws in. It's also important to know that these are blunt tip needles. Okay, you do not want to use pointy needles. You do not want to use sharpened needles. You want to use blunt tip needles. Since I use my syringes just for mixing my flavors and not for my VG, I tend to go with a smaller gauge. I will go with a larger gauge on the larger syringes. When I first started mixing, I tried measuring my VG also with this, so I got the largest gauge tip that I could get, and I was still sitting there pulling and pulling and pulling to try and get the VG in there. So I'm going to show you an easier way to do it. I don't measure my VG anymore, and I'll show you why. So when I mix, I'm going to start with my nicotine. This is 100 milligram per milliliter nicotine, PG based. Now the reason that I use PG based is for exactly the same reason that I talked about measuring the VG with the syringes. Very difficult to draw into the syringe. VG is very, very thick. So I use a PG-based nicotine, which I'm going to shake well. I've already actually been shaking it a little before the video, to make sure that there's not any hot spots in it. A hot spot forms when the nicotine kind of gathers in one area. If you look into the bottle there and you see some little strands and strings, then you need to shake it more. You need to not see those. So I'm going to shake that well. The way that I mix is I put in my nicotine first, because that's the way I am. I like to open it, measure it, put it in there, and close it, and get it out of my way, so I'm not going to dump over the bottle. Lesson learned from personal experience: use your flavor, close it again, because you don't want to dump over an entire 4-ounce bottle of Bavarian cream on your table like I did one time. I've got my 30 ml squeeze bottles here. And I'm mixing at 3 milligrams nicotine. Now it's important to understand the difference between 100 milligrams per milliliter nicotine and 100% nicotine. 100 milligrams per milliliter is a 10% solution. You do not want to use 100% nicotine, which would be 1,000 milligrams per milliliter. 100% nicotine is extremely dangerous to handle. You need vented hoods and all that kind of stuff to handle it. So I'm just going to use this for 3 milligrams per milliliter. I'm actually going to use 0.9. Now, you notice that I got a little air bubble in there. That's not a big deal. This is not for a surgical injection. I don't have to worry about an air bubble. What I do need to be aware of is that the meniscus, or the level of the fluid, comes up to the measurement point. So even though it looks like I'm putting 1 ml of nicotine in there, I'm actually putting 0.9 because that's where the fluid is. I do not have to sit here and tap it and get the air out of it and so forth. In fact, I don't want to do that. You notice I am wearing my gloves. I'm not wearing eye protection because I can't see through it. So I'm going to put my 0.9 milliliters of nicotine in there, which, using ELiquid recipes calculator, will give me a 3 milligram per milliliter total nicotine content. Now, I've just used this syringe. I have a cup of hot water, and I have an empty cup. I'm going to rinse out my syringe by drawing the hot water into it and squirting it into the empty cup. Some people will once again argue there's no right way to mix. There are several wrong ways to mix. Some people will tell you, oh, well, you shouldn't be using the same syringe for all your flavors. You shouldn't be using the same syringe for your nicotine as your flavors and so forth. I clean out my syringes, and when I can't read the numbers on them anymore, I toss it out. These syringes are 40 cents a piece, but I have 100 different flavors. I'm not going to sit there and have 100 different syringes and not only try and find the flavor for apple, but try to find the syringe that goes along with apple. Next, speaking of apple, excuse the dog. Next, speaking of apple, I'm going to take Loran's apple flavor. I got this from Wizard Labs. I've had it for a while. I ordered several of these when I first started mixing, so I've had this one for a little while. I normally order, larger quantities of flavoring now. For this recipe calls for 2.4 mils of apple. Now, why wouldn't I use the 3 mil to measure 2.4 mils? Well, because the graduation on the 3 mil is 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, and I need what did I say? 2.4. So I'm actually going to go ahead. Once again, watching for air bubbles. Two, and then up to the 0.4. Since I'm making 2 bottles, I'm going to do that in both of my bottles. 2.4. Now you may be asking, well, why would you even want the larger syringes then? Well, the reason that I would want the larger syringes is because I'm doing larger batches. If I'm doing a 500 ml batch and I'm using my magnetic mixer, I might need 80 mils of concentrate, and I don't want to do that with a 1 mil one at a time. My next is going to be put the lid on my apple so I don't tip it over. My next flavor that I'm going to do is Flavor West Caramel Candy, which is also 2.4. I've rinsed out my syringe just a second ago, so I'm going to do the same thing. 1, 2, 0.4. Rinse well. Alright, I'm done with my flavors. Now, since one of these is going to be a 70-30 and the other one is going to be high VG, if you're mixing high VG, you're pretty much done. What I've got here is my USP grade vegetable glycerin that I've poured from a gallon jug into a clear ketchup bottle. These bottles are available at the dollar store and at Wally World for, $1. What you can't see here is that I've also got a paper towel, because these dollar things tend to leak every once in a while, and you're going to see a drip or two. It's going right onto the paper towel. What I'm going to do is fill this with VG, which is a lot easier than measuring it, up to where the bottle starts to taper. That's going to be my 30 mil mark. They purposely leave a little airspace in here, which is a good thing. You don't want to fill them all the way to the top. You won't be able to shake it. Next, my dripper, which I'm going to push on there, and then, of course, my child-resistant safety cap. Now, if you notice, the air bubble actually helps with the stirring process. I've got my label here. High VG caramel apple with my nicotine strength and my warning on it, which I'm going to apply to the bottle. Now, fruits and so forth are pretty much a shake and vape. You don't have to worry about steeping time. There's different ways of steeping. The best way of steeping is honestly time, and but fortunately for this particular recipe, this isn't going to take weeks of steep because it's a very basic recipe and there's no creams in it or anything. I'm going to give that to you to slowly shake. Thank you. Now, this bottle is our 70-30. So, in order to get it to 70-30, I'm going to need to add propylene glycol. This is where ELR and other recipe calculators come in very handy, whether you're using liquids or you're using eJuice Me Up or using ELR, because the flavor concentrates that I'm putting in there are PG based, and the nicotine that I'm putting in there is PG based. So there's already some nicotine or some PG rather in there. So what I want to do is bring it up to a total of 30%, and those recipe calculator sites do that for you. So based on my recipe that I'm looking at here, I need 3.3 mils of PG, which in combination with the PG-based liquids and the PG-based nicotine is going to make it a total of 30% PG. At that point, I've got my nicotine, I've got my flavors, I've got my PG in there at the correct amount. I'm just going to add my VG again. And fill it up just to where it starts to taper once again. My drip tip, a childproof cap. Now there's one other method that I have here. This is a disposable pipette. A disposable pipette is not nearly as accurate as a syringe. However, a disposable pipette may be necessary for very strong flavors. For example, Capella's Banana Ripe, peppermint will eat instantly the rubber plunger in a syringe. So for that reason, if I'm using one of those flavors that I know from trial and error mainly ruins a syringe, I will use a pipette to measure up the amount and put it in my bottle. So there we are. I've taken, there's my caramel apple at 70-30, 3 milligrams nicotine. I've gone ahead and loaded it into a mini volt. I've shaken it well, and I can tell now if I'm shaking it, I want to make sure that it's all one color and I don't see any strings. You know, you'll see little strings in there that means that the VG is mixing in. I'll just let that get a little wetter. And there you go. Fog of War. A nice caramel apple clone, or caramel apple flavor, especially good for fall coming up and so forth. And very simple recipe. Once again, it is 8% Lorraine's apple, and 8% caramel candy from Flavor West. And that's it. So if you have any questions, please, I will post the recipe in the comments, although it's pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, feel free to post those in the comments, and I will be watching and hopefully getting lots of views and comments. Once again, hopefully somebody else will do a video on how to mix by weight. I don't have a scale here to do that, and quite frankly, I'm perfectly happy mixing with syringes. You can see that it goes pretty quick, especially if you're not narrating through the whole thing. You know, you can mix up a bottle in 30 seconds. So have a great day. Look forward to hearing your feedback and your questions. Take care.